Welcome to Friends and Fiction. 4 New York Times bestselling authors, endless stories. Novelists Mary Kay Andrews, Kristin Harmel, Kristy Woodson Harvey, and Patti Callahan Henry are 4 longtime friends with more than 70 published books between them. Together, they host Friends and Fiction, with author interviews and fascinating insider talk about publishing and writing, to highlight and support independent bookstores. They discuss the books they've written, the books they're reading now, and the art of storytelling. If you love books and you're curious about the writing world, you're in the right place.
Hello, everyone. It is Wednesday night, and it is time for the happiest hour on the internet, Friends and Fiction. We are really looking forward to spending some time with all of you, so let's get started. I am Patti Callahan Henry.
I'm Mary Kay Andrews.
I'm Kristin Harmel.
And I'm Kristy Woodson Harvey.
And this is Friends and Fiction. 4 New York Times bestselling authors, endless stories to support indie bookstores, authors, and librarians, and you, readers. Tonight, we have a huge surprise guest for you. Jennifer Robson of The Gown and Coronation Year. Elizabeth Strout had to cancel due to, as happens, unforeseen circumstances. So now, tonight, we are pre-taping our show, and we have the privilege of talking to Jennifer about her books about Queen Elizabeth. We are so excited.
You know, all of us have been riveted to the news about the sad loss of Queen Elizabeth II, and we wanted to dive into her legacy a bit tonight with our pal and best-selling author, Jennifer.
Our news feeds have been flooded with information about the monarch and the line of succession and all the royal watching gossip. And I don't know about you guys, but my People magazine and my Us Weekly are all filled. That's like an embarrassing real confession that I just made here on Friends and Fiction.
It's not embarrassing.
No?
I mean, I think we all have the same thing on our coffee table.
I also get People. Yep.
You also used to write for People. So
I did. It's not really not that embarrassing. If anyone,
It's just good news. That's all I got to say.
It is good news.
And, you know, the TV series The Crown is set to air again in November, and the royal family is everywhere. By the way, I bought myself a tiara for the occasion. And can I just tell you, this thing hurts.
Oh,
like, literally heavy as the head that wears the crown.
You know, what would have been really
the words out of my mouth.
You know what would have been really beautiful for tonight is the gorgeous headpiece that I bought you for the wedding veil launch that you complained about so very much. It would have been perfect.
Yeah,
I like that one though.
I know, but you know, I also, the palace announced today that it was the official end of mourning.
Yeah,
but I didn't know that before I scheduled my millinery. So even though, I mean, it's super dusty because I haven't worn it since Charles died, but
since Charles died, it looks like Kate's hat. That's what she wore. Meg just said that.
I'm sure it's the same thing. Anyway, The Crown is going to air again in November, and the news about the royal family is everywhere, but Jennifer Robson knows the real deal. So let's talk about it all.
So before we begin, did you know that we at Friends and Fiction are on Fable, the book club app? I bet you did know that if you've been listening to us. Our club is called Behind the Book, and now it's time to announce the book for the month. Are you ready? Patti, let's have a drum roll.
Okay, it is Elizabeth Strout's Lucy by the Sea. I will be hosting this month, and I'll be in the app talking to all of you about the book. So I'll meet you over there later.
And all you have to do to read along with us is download the Fable app and join our premium club full of behind the scenes, which you won't get anyplace else. It's just $5 a month to join our club. If you haven't joined yet, just download the Fable app and take advantage of the 14-day free trial Fable is offering right now. You can learn more at fable.co/friends and fiction.
Tonight, instead of our Ask Us Anything, we will be doing a round robin of questions about the Queen and Jennifer's books. But no worries, we'll be back next week with our Ask Us Anything and our Just Us episode. So exciting.
So excited.
Yeah. For now, let's get to our dear friend, Jennifer Robson, who has written about Queen Elizabeth in 2 books.
Jennifer is an academic by background and a lifelong self-professed history nerd. She is the author of 6 novels set during and after the 2 world wars, including Somewhere in France, After the War is Over, Moonlight over Paris, and The Gown, a work of historical fiction concerning the creation of the wedding gown for Queen Elizabeth's 1947 marriage to Prince Philip. Her most recent novel was Our Darkest Night.
Jen's upcoming novel for 2023 is more timely than she could have known. It's called Coronation Year, and it's set in London in 1953, the year the new queen is to be crowned.
God, I love that cover.
Yeah, isn't that beautiful?
That cover is chill bump stunning.
Yeah.
So Jennifer is a slouch in the academic department. She studied She studied French literature and modern history as an undergraduate at King's University at Western, then attended St. Antony's College at the University of Oxford, where she obtained a doctorate in British economic and social history. While at Oxford, she was a Commonwealth Scholar and an SSHRC doctoral fellow, which we're going to have to ask her to untangle that acronym there.
Jennifer lives in Toronto, Canada with her husband and 3 children and shares office space with Ellie the sheepdog and her feline companions, Sam and Micah.
Sean, could you bring Jennifer on to join us?
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome.
Yeah.
So
We
good
are
to
so
see
happy
everyone's
that-
lovely faces.
You too, always.
You too.
We are always happy to see you. So let's dive in, my friend. All right.
It
Although
has
we've
been
had-
a few weeks.
A few.
Oh my
Wait.
goodness.
You were here for Our Darkest Night, right? We got
I
to talk
was,
about
I
that.
was. I was just referring to since Her Majesty died, I feel as if
Oh.
Yeah.
it's, I'm still coming to terms with it, funnily enough. Just in that sense of waking up in the morning and then having to remind myself that this has happened. And it really does feel as if an era has come to an end.
Yeah.
And it's hard to process it. It's, each day I think I figure it out a little bit more, and not to set aside the very real problems that are afflicting this world right now. I mean,
We have not lived in a world, none of the 5 of us have lived in a
Yeah.
world that she wasn't alive in.
Yeah. The very youngest people who would know the world without her would be well into their 80s. I mean, my father's 82 and remembers
Yeah.
her coronation and remembers when the king was king, but any younger than about 80, really, there would be very few people with direct memories of life before she was this global presence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's astounding.
I read a stat, which I'm probably going to get it wrong, but I think it said that like 90% of the world has never known a world in which she wasn't queen.
Yeah.
I think that sounds pretty accurate to me.
I mean,
Yeah.
that it was like she's literally been queen for so long that the vast majority of the world has never lived in a time when she wasn't, which is
Yeah.
really crazy to think about.
Yeah, and
Wow.
crushed every longevity record. I think the only monarch who reigned longer was Louis XIV, because I think he was an infant when he became king.
Yeah.
But that,
But there's been no queen.
no,
has been.
no, and just also because of the growth of kind of modern technology and the ubiquity of the mass media and where her picture just everywhere means that she's more familiar to us than anyone living, under Louis XIV ever was. Vanishingly few people would have met or seen the man relative to, say, the overall population of France. When you think of how many people not only stopped photographs and film of the Queen, but actually met her over the course of her reign, or saw her go by. But in terms of people she met that she shook hands with, we're talking like probably into the hundreds of thousands over 70 plus years. It kind of blows your mind when you think of it. Also makes you maybe want to reach for some hand sanitizer. I mean, she usually had her gloves on, but still.
I know, but she stayed, and we never knew her sick. We didn't even know her sick when she died. Like,
it's probably why our immune system was so good.
Yeah, really. Yeah.
Okay, let's dive into your book for a second. I know, because we're just going to dive down this rabbit hole, but I really want to talk about your books before we get moving. So you've been on the show previously, but could you tell our viewers a bit about the gown and about the Coronation Year and what they're about and how they might or might not tie together before we start really getting into how much we miss her?
Well, for sure. So the gown is set in 1947, and it followed an earlier book of mine called Good Night from London that ends on VE Day. And I started because I wanted to answer the question of what happened to ordinary people in Britain after the war, because a lot of our popular kind of images, the collective consciousness, we kind of think of VE Day and the crowds in Trafalgar Square and everyone cheering and happy, and then sometimes we just seem to zip ahead to the 1950s. And I was really interested in what happened in the 1940s, but I needed something to attach the book to, rather than just one long, grim, miserable epic about how terrible life was in Britain in the post-war years. And the wedding seemed to me to be this beacon amid all the gloom. And so my next step, having thought, well, I want to write something about the royal wedding, was to find a way to write about it that would connect ordinary people to the story, as opposed to it being about the Queen and courtiers and so on. Not that I wasn't interested, but I just thought I would have I wasn't confident I could have any insight into the Queen's interior life. And I know this is something we'll probably talk about a bit later, about how she was in some ways such a mysterious person. So I decided to go inside the workrooms where her wedding gown was made, of Norman Hartnell, the designer. And what made the gown extraordinary was not the style of the gown. I think most of us have a picture of our moms or grandmas wearing a very similar wedding dress if they happen to get married in that period. The princess line fitted bodice, long sleeves. What made it extraordinary was the embroidery. So those were the people I focused on, fictitious characters, but they felt real to me. And I have just behind me this little embroidery that I did because I wanted to learn how to do the embroidery myself. I thought that would be a good way to kind of get inside the story. Now that is the one single thing that I made. I ran out of steam after doing that. That took me 10 hours. This one little embroidered star, little diamond chips and pearls. So that was the story of the gown, and it was split between the points of view of three women. One modern day woman who's the granddaughter of one of my characters from 1947, and then with Coronation Year, I just keep coming back to World War II and its aftermath, because it's there's millions of stories there. I mean, we're just scratching the surface. Even though people keep saying, when will World War II be over as a thing that people write about? And I think confidently, I can't imagine in my lifetime that people will stop writing about it. And so again, I thought, what can I center a book on that will show what life was like in that period, without necessarily being about the Queen, but being kind of having her as a point on the compass, if I can put it that way, that everyone directs themselves towards. So Coronation Year is set in a little hotel in London called the Blue Lion, that's been around since 1560 in the same family, the Howard family. Really lurching from disaster to disaster. I mean, there's never been a lot of money. It's never been very successful. Um, and it's now down to the last surviving Howard, a young woman called Edwina Duncan Howard, or for short, to keep the hotel open. And she has this one extraordinary chance, as you know, she's really down to her last few pennies, when the parade route for the coronation is announced, and the Blue Line is right on the parade route, which means she can charge a fortune for her rooms, just as they do even now, right? If you happen to have a business or a hotel or even your own private flat that overlooks a procession for a royal wedding or a coronation, you can charge a premium for those rooms. And so it's the story of how Edie tries to save her hotel, with the help of two friends, a young artist called James Geddes, who's come to live at the hotel. He's been awarded a commission to paint the Queen on her coronation day, and a young woman called Stella Donati, who's a photojournalist. And if the name seems at all familiar to anyone, if you read Our Darkest Night, she's one of the central characters in Our Darkest Night, and I brought her from Italy to go on an adventure in England.
Ah, I cannot wait to read that book.
Yeah.
I think it's so interesting the way the wheels turn in our minds and how the one story hooks into another story.
Mhm.
You know, when Elizabeth died, she was both the longest lived and longest reigning monarch. I was, drugged up from knee surgery, but I was still turned on, the television and was watching it. What do you think? What do you think it is about the monarchy and Elizabeth in particular? I mean, I read somewhere that how many people watched the funeral?
5 billion or something.
What do you think it is that is so magnifying or fascinating to all of us?
I think it's that it's hard to imagine a world without them in the background, even if you're not British or you're not part of the Commonwealth, in the sense that the Queen is not your head of state or even kind of part of the broad system of governance. That you live under. She was still this presence that was just, and she changed. I mean, the Elizabeth of 1947 is a very different Elizabeth of 2022. But she was always resolutely there, and she never, she had a stoicism to her that I think we can recognize. Anybody who knows anyone who lived through the Second World War will recognize very much that chin up, get on with it, the keep calm and carry on attitude, which she had throughout her life. And it's something to look up to, above and beyond the whole she's royal and all of that, which I always take with a bit of a grain of salt, as much as I'm a Canadian and she's my head of state, and now it's the King who's the head of state of Canada. Above and beyond that, and I think it's fair to say, if you personally have some issues with the idea of an inherited monarchy, separate from that, they're the people themselves, and there's much in the Queen to look up to, in terms of courage, of bravery, of doing something that was, frankly, at times very boring, very dull, very tiresome and exhausting, and never being known to complain over 70 years and hundreds and hundreds of public engagements a year. Oh, well, public and private. I mean, there was the work she was doing every day that nobody saw, going through the dispatch boxes and so on. And all something that was never her choice in the first place, which is the thing that is hard to imagine for so much of us whose our lives are governed by kind of a sense of freedom that she never knew. When she was 10 years old, she became the heir, or the heir is presumptive. There was always this idea that even though her parents were in their 40s, they could somehow produce a boy who would have jumped the line of succession. So she was just the heir is presumptive. But to be from 10 to be told, well, this is it. This is what your life will be. You will be the monarch. You are set apart. You are set apart. You cannot have a life like anyone else. You cannot go and live in the country and, raise horses and corgis, which is probably what she would have done if she'd had a choice. It's kind of, I think it would have been terrifying to have been freighted with that, to have that kind of draped on your shoulders as a little girl, and then to never ever question it publicly, or to complain or to moan. I mean, there's a wonderful British tradition. I say this as the granddaughter of people from Britain, where it's whining about things is looked down upon, but there's something about having a good moan or a good whinge to let off steam, which is perfectly acceptable. But there's a difference between the two things, and she may well have occasionally had a good whinge behind closed doors about the tiresome people she had to deal with. I'm sure Boris Johnson, was not her favorite person, but she never let people down. I mean, if she was needed to go and do something publicly, she would show up, and even into her 90s, that's just, it's kind of mind-blowing. I mean, everybody else gets to retire. Even the Pope gets to retire if he wants to.
Well, she's such a sphinx too, because she never really talked about or wrote about what she really thought about anything. And don't you say that in the essay you wrote, Jennifer?
So
never
did complain, never explain.
Yeah, Kristy, you have it exactly. And also she saw it as her constitutional duty that she was able to kind of counsel, warn, discuss matters of state with her politicians. But at no point were her public views ever to be known. Otherwise, she would not be able to execute her constitutional role as monarch. And she kept to that, and really her public views that we know of are pretty anodyne. I mean, they're the ones that everybody can get, be kind to others, but that actually made her most things to most people, as opposed to if you take a hard stance on something, no matter how meaningful, you invariably alienate the people who have a different stance on that. That's something that I think Charles is going to struggle with. I think the king will struggle with in the months to come, which is he will have to set aside his public opinions. He has said he will do so, but I think it's going to be really hard for him to not weigh in publicly, and to have to let other people do the talking. And I'm not discrediting his opinions. I think his stance on the environment is very reasonable. And he was an environmentalist back in the 70s and 80s when he got laughed at for it. But he's not allowed, under kind of effectively the deal, as it were, the way things are set up, for him to be the head of state. He is really not allowed to be forth on things. So he may end up, I suspect we're going to see over the next few months in the coming years, where he bumps up against that and has some difficulty, as any of us would. I mean, imagine if you'd had it
as anyone who's not the queen.
Exactly. And because there's nobody else in the royal family, with possible exception of the Queen Mum, who is also very good at just not expressing public, her opinions too strongly on anything beyond horse racing, and how strong she liked her gin and tonics. But everybody else in the royal family, I think actually one other exception would be the current Princess of Wales, who has walked a very, very fine line. I mean, and when I say that, I mean she's done it very well, between advocating forcefully for things that she finds important. And I think, how can anyone be against improving children's mental health. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
it's a safe topic. It's also a worthy topic.
Yeah.
But she also does, there's no record of her having a controversial opinion on anything. And that takes a lot of discipline. I mean, imagine
Yeah.
again, if someone told me, well, you can't have a public opinion on anything anymore, Jennifer, about anything. You can't.
We're not going to tell Mary Kay that.
Yeah,
We're just
I
Super wow.
And so the discipline it takes. But I think with the Queen, you see that the discipline came from the war years, and also just from the shock of what her uncle abdicating did to her family.
Yeah.
I mean, they went from being not private citizens, but living pretty quietly. She was the equivalent of Princess Eugenie in the line of succession. If you
Oh,
compare
wow.
then
So
to
to
now.
skip right over to
Yeah,
there.
and imagine, if say Charles had never had any children and had abdicated, and then the throne would have come to Andrew, which thank goodness it didn't. Then Eugenie is the niece of
It's
the monarch.
the daughter.
But those young women are able to live relatively private lives, and to then, when you're little, have the chance of that private life just taken from you. And that was it. There was no backing out, not after what she'd seen to what becoming king had done to her father, who was never a very robust man in terms of his health. Even when he was a young man, he was a very good athlete. He competed at Wimbledon a number of times. He was such a good tennis
Wow.
player.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And if you look at pictures of King George as a young man, he was very, very handsome. Just a very, I mean, he was a real catch. But he never expected to become king. He was never trained or educated to become king. And he had a personal level of shyness because he had the speech impediment that he overcome. Most of us will have seen that love, the King's Speech, which I thought was quite a lovely movie. And so, but the strain of being king during the war, it destroyed his health. And so the Queen, Princess Elizabeth and the Queen, she was a witness to all of that. And so the thought of her ever stepping aside and leaving it to somebody else to do was unthinkable. This was the job, for good or for bad. This was the job that she'd been given for life. And to her, just to finish off, it was also, she considered it on the level of, if you look at it from a religious point of view, she considered it a sacrament that had been made at her coronation. And it wasn't so much this divine right of kings. It's just that she'd been given this duty and she'd been anointed a queen. And that isn't something you can set aside. Just an important distinction is that her uncle Edward, he became king when his father died, but he was never crowned. So he was never anointed as monarch. I think to abdicate after that is a much trickier prospect.
Ooh, that's interesting.
I didn't realize he was never anointed.
Me neither.
Okay.
That's really interesting. I think it's so interesting, just the thought of her being 10 years old, knowing she was going to be queen. And there's a part of me that wonders if being so young, knowing that's going to happen, and then being so young when she actually became queen, almost made it kind of, I don't want to say easier, but I feel like you're at an age where you don't question so much. Like, I feel like sometimes those things, that we sort of rebel against don't necessarily happen until we're older. So I don't know. It's an interesting
and I think she was raised to be dutiful. I mean,
yeah, of course.
That was part of it. There is a lovely anecdote that I don't know if it is true, but it feels true, which is when the girls were told that their uncle had abdicated and their father was becoming king, and therefore Elizabeth would one day most likely become queen. And her sister, Princess Margaret, turned to her and said, "Oh, poor you." Yeah. And I mean, I can see cheeky Princess Margaret saying that. But it does ring true that of all the things to have fall on your head when you're only 10 years old, that's a lot. And but I don't think she questioned it. That being said, I don't think she ever woke up feeling, oh, why do I have to do this? It was just second nature to her, as second nature as breathing is, that this would be her role in life.
Yeah. Well, and seems like there was one thing that she did get to choose, if this is true, but that she sort of chose Prince Philip, that he was her guy, and she was pretty strongly set on him. So for those of us who have not heard this story, can you tell us kind of briefly about Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, and their real life love story, and then how that worked its way into the gown?
Well, it's lovely because no one knows for sure, because neither the people involved wrote memoirs, and I can't imagine in my wildest dream that there's a memoir that we're going to be hearing from. The publisher is going to be saying, the secret intimate diaries of Queen Elizabeth II. That is not. There may well be a diary, but I think she would have had it preserved under what will probably be the 100-year rule for.
Yeah, I
safety.
read that her journal does exist, and she
Yeah.
wrote in it every day, and it's locked up for 100 years.
Yeah,
Wow.
which is pretty typical, right? And just to make sure everybody in it is dead, so there can be no embarrassment. But the best kind of guesses center on her having met Philip when she was around 13 and he was around 17, and that was it for her. She never looked to know. There's just no record of her ever having looked at anyone else, ever being interested in anyone else. And if you see pictures of Philip as a teenager and a young man, he was. I don't think the black and white photos that we typically see of him do him justice. He was absolutely spectacular looking. I mean, he just was. And the papers talked about, the Greek god and so on, but he was tall and handsome and fair, like that fair hair, and he just. And I don't think he intended to sweep her off her feet. I think he probably, insofar as he noticed her, it was probably just as, this young cousin who was just a tween, really. But she noticed him, and she didn't forget. And then it was, later in her teens, probably when she was, it was around 18 or so, 18, 19, that again, their paths kept crossing. And interestingly, it looks as if they probably were engaged about a year before it was announced officially. So when she was still 20, but her father, I can see this as someone of who my son is 18, and the thought of him growing up and doing grown-up things on the one hand thrills me, and the other hand terrifies me. And so her father wanted to keep the us four together as long as he could. And so he insisted that she and Philip not make the engagement public until she had turned 21, and that they not be married until she was 21. So they waited into the summer of 1947, a few months after her 21st birthday, to announce the engagement, and then they got married in November. But Philip at the time was considered, the courtiers, right? Those gray men that we really know their names, but who seem to run a lot of the things behind the scenes at Buckingham Palace. A lot of them looked down on him because he was quite literally poor. He had no money. He was,
Wow.
a kind of a very, very distant from the actual throne in terms of his descent from royalty. And the closest kind of relative who was in any position of power was Lord Mountbatten, who was his uncle. And a lot of courtiers feared that Philip was just really a kind of a tool of his uncle to try and gain more power within the government, both kind of both soft power and actual real power. And he was treated as this kind of this bumpkin from nowhere. And when you think of it too, because he really did his ancestry on both sides is extremely distinguished. But his family had been the Greek royal family for a few generations. They'd been kind of parachuted in, and then were had to hustle out pretty quickly. And he had no home. he literally had no home, and he went from various schools, and then in the summertime he would go and stay with a relative, and then he was in the Royal Navy where he was decorated for his valor. But so he himself, there was no there's nothing, he didn't bring anything to that marriage except himself, and she did not care.
I think that was
and
enough
and
for
that's
her.
the beautiful thing, right? She
Yeah.
and that was it, right? That was it for her. And and there's some more candid photographs from their wedding day of the two of them just smiling at each other, which are just lovely. And they were
Yeah.
young too. I mean, 21 and 24, or just 25. That's I just think of how young they were, and
Yeah.
but also how long they were together. It's
Yeah.
Yes.
quite something,
Yes. And
Um,
how they balanced each other so well. I mean, I think it was just such a
yeah,
perfect balance, and they each had each other to lean on, which I think was
yeah,
incredible.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
Jennifer, I would love to ask you about Queen Elizabeth II's coronation, because obviously that is at the center of your next book.
yeah,
But I'm curious specifically, what makes or I guess what are the elements of a British monarch's coronation that make it so different from that of other monarchies? So what makes it unique? What makes it
yeah,
historic? What makes it fascinating? And how do you think plans for King Charles's coronation, although they have not been made public
yeah,
yet, will differ from his mother's? Will we see some elements that are the same?
yeah, yeah. So I think what's fascinating about well, until fairly recently, it would have been the English king or queen's coronation, and then really, only from the 17th century onward do we see the British coronation. Um, but it's ancient. There are elements in it that dates to the time of William the Conqueror, so 1,000 years ago. There are even a few pieces of regalia that date to that time. Most of the English regalia was destroyed during the Civil War in the
Oh, wow.
1640s. It was melted down. I mean, it's kind of
Oh,
tragic to
wow.
think of because there are some
Yeah.
really, really old pieces. At one point in Coronation Year, I thought about including an element of that regalia as a MacGuffin to be looked for, and I did a ton of research on it. And then I realized it didn't really fit in the book, but I'm keeping that for someday, maybe a lost crown that someone can discover. But the medieval crowns looked very, very different from the ones that were remade when Charles II returned to the throne in the 1660s, and they had a coronation for him. So they had to remake the regalia, and by regalia I mean not just the crowns, and we saw this at the Queen's funeral, the orb and the
Yes.
scepters. Those are parts of the regalia. They're things like their bracelets. There's rings. All of them are considered uh, in some degree to one degree or another, sacred items. The oldest piece of the regalia that exists is a spoon that dates from the time of Saint Edward the Confessor. So again, very again, the 1,000 years ago, and
Wow.
it's a spoon that's meant the holy oil is put into, and then the spoon is used to anoint the king or
And they still have that, Jennifer? They
that's
still
the
have that.
one piece that they managed to keep, that somebody I think
Wow.
had stolen away and managed to hide.
A
And then the
thousand
rest
years
of it
old.
is,
That spoon is 1,000
yeah,
years old.
yeah, and or
Wow.
in the order of it. I mean, it dates well before the time of the Civil War, but everything else was lost. And so the crowns you see
Amazing.
today are later recreations, although some of the gems in them are extremely old. There's what's called the Black Prince's ruby, which is in fact a spinel. It's not a ruby, but it's this huge thing. And there you can actually see where it was drilled through. At one point, it would have been on a helmet or something. And
Wow.
that is within, I think it's within the imperial state crown. I mean, don't I feel as if I dug into all of the regalia and absorbed a lot, and then had to set it aside. And I feel
Yeah.
as if I'll
Like
get up.
studying for a test.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. At the time of the when the King Charles is crowned, but there. So with the other European monarchies, all of which are constitutional monarchies, there things are just much more low key, and that's something that has evolved over centuries. So when a new king or queen is proclaimed, it's not a religious ceremony as such. They may have a mass afterwards, but there's nothing in the way of an anointing or that king or queen becoming head of the church in the country, where there's a real separation of church and state. And you see this with the Dutch monarchy, with the Danish monarchy, for example. And they do things well in their own way and have beautiful crown jewels and so on, but there's not a long involved multi stage ceremony in which they are crowned. Really, it's Britain is the only nation that still has what you'd call an ancient crowning ceremony. And it takes. What's interesting, I've watched the Queen's coronation, I don't know how many times now. It's 3 hours long if you watch the completely uncut version. I mean, 3 hours.
Wow.
And a lot of it is caught up in what I'd almost call heraldic rituals. So and I'm going to mangle but they'll have names of the first lord of the blue mantle poursuivant or something. I'm making that up, but and he'll come and pay homage, and then somebody else comes and pays homage to and it just went on and on and on. There's those elements, and then the young queen she curtsies to the in the four directions, so she's curtsying and herself, paying homage to the people of her realms. So that goes on, and it must have been such a feat of endurance for her.
Yeah.
And
As
wearing that crown, they said it was
wearing- so
so heavy.
that was luckily towards the end, but even before that, they are layer upon layer of these very, very heavy embroidered gowns. And she was, they were so heavy, and then the train was so heavy. The young women who were her, I guess, handmaidens, had to kind of, at one point, they had to give her a little push to get her going, because the nap of the carpet was in the opposite
Oh.
direction to the nap of the velvet on her train, and they kind of glued together like Velcro.
Oh my gosh.
And so it was, but so that, all of that it's very long, it's very involved. To my mind, the really interesting part of the coronation is the religious part of it, in some ways, because that's the most ancient part of it. And the anointing itself takes place under what they call a canopy. If you've ever been to a Jewish wedding, it looks like a huppah to me. And it's to kind of shelter the monarch at the moment of their anointing. And you can also watch King George VI, his coronation. You can look it up on YouTube. It's there. British Pathé has it. And monarch is all the robes they have are kind of taken away till they're dressed very simply in kind of a plain white garment, and then they're anointed under this canopy. And that's the moment where kind of the sacred nature of becoming a monarch descends upon them. The crowning is considered extra. But the weight of the crown, it's more than just I think there's a literal weight along with the figurative weight of it. And so if you watch even just the highlights of the 1953 coronation, what to me is intensely moving is the moment where the crown is placed upon the young queen's head, and she's just smothered in various garments and robes and copes and vestments, and she's carrying I don't think she has the orb in her hands. I think she just had two scepters that were kind of balanced that she was holding. And then the crown is put on her head by, the very elderly Archbishop of Canterbury, who looked like he was going to topple over if he wasn't.
It
And
looked too
goes
heavy
on,
for
and
him.
there's a
Yeah.
moment where you see it settle on her head, and her head goes down. Because as much as she's bracing herself, it weighs, I don't know how much it weighs again. I think it's 7 pounds. And
Wow.
that's the crown of King Edward. It is humongous. They remade the inside so it wouldn't, fall right down over her nose, but it's still a heavy, heavy weight. And then she had to sit there while all the lords of the realm came forward and knelt before her and pledged to serve her and kissed her cheek. So the first one was her husband, and then one by one, the kind of in order of rank, the remaining lords did that. And all the while she had to sit there holding, and she looks so alone.
Yeah.
And that's the moment I describe it in Coronation Year. One of my characters is a photojournalist who's there observing. And it's this moment of complete solitude. She's in a cathedral that's stuffed with 8,000 people. And her husband is there, her mother, her sister, her son, age 3, is up there watching. But she is entirely alone. She has been set apart, right? And it's something that she has chosen to do. And there's something I just found very, very moving about that. Whether you agree with the idea of a monarchy or not, and whether you believe in it or not, I still think there's something admirable about somebody who willingly takes on
Yeah.
this role. And that's the moment that I get chills when I watch it. And I, again, as I say, I don't know how many times I've now watched it, just again and again and again. But
Well, and your perspective is different than ours because she truly is. We live in America.
Mhm.
She is still your monarch. You
Yeah.
live
Yeah.
in a commonwealth, and you wrote this. I want to point all our viewers. We're going to post it, but you wrote this gorgeous article for the Globe and Mail titled "The Queen of Our Dreams," and it explains so much about what the monarchy means to you, what it means to Canada, what it means to a commonwealth. And although we're fascinated, it actually is your monarch. I mean,
Yeah.
when I visited
Yeah.
Canada and her portrait is everywhere, her likeness is everywhere. I mean, she is ever present.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's
So-
on our money, our stamps, our signs for the highway. My mother was a judge. The Queen signed the document that made
Oh,
my mother a
wow.
judge. It's hanging
Wow.
upstairs
Cool.
in my study. She was very present, and so yeah, we have. I mean, it's not unusual to have a separation between the head of state and then the political head of a nation. They have that in Ireland, for example.
Mhm.
They have a president and a prime minister, and so does France, for example. But in Canada, we have our prime minister, so everybody knows Justin Trudeau, but we also have a head of state who is our governor general most of the time. But when the queen, or now king, is in Canada, the king is the head of state. So the governor general really just
Wow.
stands in for the monarch when
Oh,
they are
wow.
absent.
Interesting.
It's
But,
so fascinating. I mean,
Yeah,
I
I
feel
didn't
like
know that.
our education about that would take like an entire episode.
Yeah,
So
yeah. The court cases are, in the United States, it would be the state or the nation versus so and so, and in Canada,
wow.
it is now Rex versus, or before it was Regina, and so it is, and we're part of the Commonwealth. So Canada is one of the few realms that still exist. There are fewer and fewer countries that have the Queen as head of state, apart from Britain. Canada, Australia, New Zealand are among them. I think within the next 5 to 10 years, we'll see quite a number of countries who decide not to have the British monarch as their head of state, but want to remain part of the Commonwealth, which is effectively what the empire used to be. It was transformed into the Commonwealth by the Queen's father, King George VI, after the war. And you know what? It was actually, when you think of him and his advisors at the time having the presence of mind to realize in those days that the empire needed to be replaced by something of a more positive nature. It's astonishing to me in some ways that it happened as early as the 1950s, as opposed to, more
Yeah.
recently,
Yeah.
where we're now all coming to grips with what, what colonialism did to most of the nations, for example, that were part of the empire.
Listen, we could ask you at least 1 million more questions. I'm not kidding. I feel like we've only been talking for 2 minutes, but if you don't mind sticking around for one more
Absolutely.
minute, we have more to talk about with you, but we have a couple quick announcements. Mary Kay?
Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
Sorry, the dog came in. You know how that goes. We want to remind you to support indie booksellers when and where you can. One way to do that is to visit our own Friends in Fiction bookshop.org page, where you can find Jennifer's books, including her upcoming book, which you can pre-order, and all of our books and books by the four of us and our past guests at a discount.
Also, our new Friends in Fiction first edition box is available now from the indie bookstore Booktown in Manasquan, New Jersey. And it features signed hardcover first editions from all four of us in 2023. And a Friends in Fiction kitchen towel that says, "Dinner can wait. It's time for Friends in Fiction." I'm so excited to get one of those for myself. It's
I
so
know,
much fun.
right?
Yes,
I know.
So
yes.
cute. I can't wait.
Oh, I can't. Yeah, Kristy, you've seen them, but I haven't seen it yet. I'm so excited. So you can order that box right now at booktown.com. That's Booktown with an E at the end. And again, that's all four of our books in 2023 signed.
Also, have you listened to our Writer's Block podcast with all of us and our beloved librarian, Ron Block? We'll always post links under announcements each time a new one drops on Friday. On the most recent episode, Ron and I got to talk to Pulitzer Prize winning novelist Andrew Sean Greer about his new book, Less is Lost. And I can promise you, you do not want to miss that conversation. Coming up this Friday, Ron and
It was me. It was Kristin.
I was going to say, Kristin, I was talking to Reese Ware about her new, look, you just read my mind about her new novel, The Quick Girl, which I am sure was incredible. So listen, review, subscribe, all the things. And Jennifer, we were just going to ask you, do you have any other books that you suggest we read if we want to learn more about the Queen?
There is a wonderful one, and I just had to look up the name of the author. I have it tucked away, as I told you ladies before. We're in the process of moving, and most of my favorite books are in boxes at the moment, which is driving me nuts. I keep thinking, I want to reach for something. One wonderful book that I recommend is called Mrs. Queen Takes the Train by William Kuhn, Kuhn, and it's a novel, and it's. I don't want to give too much away, but it takes the Queen out of her world and plops her into ours, if that makes sense. And it's very entertaining. It's a very sweet natured book, and I just loved it to bits.
What's it called again?
It's called Mrs. Queen Takes the Train.
It's like one I haven't heard of.
I love that. Yeah.
I have all these books lined up to read about her in my obsession, like The Windsor Knot and
so great.
Palace Papers. I know that's a little scandalous, but
it's fun. Yeah.
Well, before we wrap up, one final reminder. You probably know about our Friends in Fiction official book club with Brenda and Lisa, which is a separate page from our Friends in Fiction page. They are always reading fun books and chatting about fun things. So mark your calendars to join them on October 13th for a happy hour with our amazing podcast host and librarian, Ron Block. It is sure to be a good time. And their next book club discussion is on October 17th with author Stacey Willingham, which is going to be so great to discuss her debut novel, A Flicker in the Dark.
So Jennifer, isn't there someone you wanted to wish a happy birthday?
I do. And I think you all know her as well, the lovely Karma Brown.
Yes.
It's a very special birthday for Karma today. So lots of love from all of us. And
happy birthday, Karma.
Happy birthday.
Oh, Jennifer, thank you so much for spending time with us and talking about all things royal and coronation and monarchy. And your books just are so fascinating. And cannot wait to read Coronation Year. And of course, the gown enchanted all of us. So before you go, can you tell viewers where to keep up with you online and make sure that they know about Coronation Year the second it comes out?
Yeah. On both Facebook and Instagram, you can find me at author Jennifer Robson.
Okay.
And then my website is jennifer-robson.com.
Do you think his coronation will be next year in 2023?
I think so, yes. My
Okay.
suspicion is sometime in the late spring, early summer.
Okay.
I've had
Just a
these
guess?
weird flickers of guilt that I have this book coming out at the same
Oh
time.
my gosh, I think it's perfect.
Oh,
synchronicity.
yes. It's the
But you know
universe
what? I think
lining
of it
up.
as an
Yeah.
homage to Her Majesty the Queen.
Of
So,
course.
that
Of
too,
course,
I
it's
will-
like it's like you were listening to the little hum underneath, and look at that. It's amazing.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us, Jennifer. And all of you out there, you remember you can find all of our back episodes on YouTube. We are live there every single week, just like we are on Facebook. And if you subscribe, you will not miss a thing. And recently we noticed there's a little bell up there on the right. And if you ring that bell, well, if you click that bell, you will be notified whenever a new episode comes up. So to be sure, come back right here next week, same time, same place. We are having a Just Us episode. We are going to talk about Kristin Harmel's The Sweetness of Forgetting 10th anniversary edition. And we cannot wait to see y'all. So for now, good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, Jen.
Thank you for tuning in. You can join us every week on Facebook or YouTube, where our live show airs on Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Also, subscribe to our podcast and follow us on Instagram. We're